لقيته جنبه بيقول لي اسمعي، قلت له طب كان هيجيب
نعم
فبيقول لي
نعم.
is it not needed؟ قلت له لا لو وقفت هديها لك.
Please move down the front, folks who are attending this event, so we don't feel lonely. I mean, if you really want to sit at the back, you can, if you want to sneak out, but if, you know, it's nice if you move a bit closer to the front. Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm going to kick us off. The people that are eating your snacks, please feel free to stay. Don't enjoy your catering. And if you do feel like joining this event, please join. And thank you so much. I know you finished late the previous panel, so thank you for letting us come and start our event as well. I think if we leave it too much longer, everyone will be asleep or heading home. So I'm really grateful to you all. And as I said, please stay and enjoy your catering. And if you would like to stay for this event on transitioning agricultural systems for sustainability and climate resilience, then please do. You're very welcome. What I want to do is thank all the speakers for taking time in their busy schedule to join us tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge Eurogroup for Animals as the co-organiser of this side event. So welcome to the side event organised by World Animal Protection in cooperation with Eurogroup. My name's Kelly Dent. I'm the Global Director for External Engagement with World Animal Protection. Please allow me to introduce very briefly our organisation, and then I'll go on to introduce the panel, and then I will kick us off with our brilliant panel of experts. So World Animal Protection our mission is to move the world to protect animals. We were founded in 1950 and have 13 offices around the world, in the global north and in the global south. Our work focuses on two key areas: the food system and protecting wildlife. And in doing this, we engage with companies, governments and international bodies to put farmed and wild animals on the global agenda while mobilising individuals to take action to protect animals. So today we're joined by experts in agriculture, food systems, climate and animal welfare to discuss how we can radically... Can you hear? Yeah, can people hear? Speak up. Wow, I'm not usually asked to speak up, but I can certainly speak up. So today we're joined by a panel of experts in agriculture and food systems, climate and animal welfare to discuss how we can radically change the way we eat, farm and use land to reduce emissions while still feeding a growing population. So we know that there are 80 billion animals farmed globally, and most of them are in cruel factory farms. This evening we want to explore why a just protein transition to plant-based proteins and agroecological farming will be critical, and how this can offer some concrete solutions for a more sustainable and climate-resilient pathway for humans, animals and the planet. So we want to actually here at World Animal Protection, and I'm sure most of you here, we want to see systems change. We want to see systems transformation. We want to see systems that do away with cruelty to animals. So we've got sort of two segments tonight. One will look at the challenges, and then the other one, what we're going to call good food for thought, will actually look at some of the solutions as to how we might transform some of the systems. For anybody who's listening online, welcome to you as well. You can ask questions at any point during the session through slido.com and enter the code, and I'll say this slowly, 3545595. So that code again is 3545595. And please indicate the speaker that you would like a response to your question to respond to. The event's also been streamed live, as I've just said, and it's on the UNFCCC YouTube account under the COP27 side events playlist. So, that's been turned down. Sorry. So should you wish to tweet about the event, you can use the hashtag food the number 4, so food for climate. And you can also tag the official Twitter account of World Animal Protection, which is @MoveTheWorld. So without keeping you any longer, please let me introduce you to our speakers. I'm going to introduce all of the speakers at once, and then we will go through them on the panel so that we don't sort of break up the presentations as we go along. So our first presenter is the gentleman sitting right down the far end, Kachi. He analyses trends and best practice in sustainable finance at the New Climate Institute, and currently has a focus on how the private sector interacts with energy and land use systems. His particular areas of expertise include Paris-aligned investment decision-making, multilateral banks reform, and climate finance mobilisation. The second speaker, who's actually not with us, is Naira Hofmeister. Naira is from Brazil. She will be at our event tomorrow morning, but her flight was delayed out of Brazil due to a weather event. And she has actually been travelling now for about 3 days, so the poor woman will be exhausted when she gets here. But she will be at our event tomorrow. We have a short segment from her that we will be playing. She's an award-winning investigative journalist. She has 15 years of experience covering socio-economic conflicts in Brazil. She works for Repórter Brazil, which is recognised for its in-depth work revealing violations of social and environmental rights and their connections with global supply chains. Next, immediately to my left, is Karen Mapusua. She's the president of IFOAM, the Organics International, and is the director of the Land Resources Division of the Pacific Community based in Fiji. She has worked in rural development in the Pacific regions for close to 20 years and has a focus on organic agriculture as a path to social and economic development. And then immediately to my right is Imelda Bacudo. She's a senior advisor to ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Island Nations, and its 10 member states. She supports strengthened regional and international policies to support the transformation of ASEAN to low emissions and resilient agri-food sectors. And then last but not least is James Yeates. Dr. James Yeates is the Chief Executive Officer of the World Federation for Animals. It's a membership organisation that was founded just last year in 2021 by and for national, regional and international animal protection organisations. James has over a decade of experience in advocacy for animal welfare, and James is also a vet, which will be useful information for you to know when he is speaking. So what I want to do now is kick us off and hand over to you, please, Aki. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a clicker? No. Okay, I'll just say next slide then. As mentioned, I spend a lot of my time thinking about how to achieve the Paris goals and how to translate basically IPCC scenarios into decision-making for financial institutions. And recently I've spent a lot of work thinking about how to basically achieve the Paris goals through finance. And we're in a very hard time right now, and we're faced by a number of crises. Next slide. Of course, we have the climate crisis that brings us all together on a regular basis once a year. But more recently, we also have a food crisis, not only driven by the climate crisis itself, but also the Russian invasion of the Ukraine and the resulting disruption in global grain markets. Next slide, please. We have a global population that may increase up to 11.2 billion people by 2100, and so we've had a recent increase in the number of people that are affected by food insecurity and hunger, and that is going to become even more challenging as we go to as the global population grows. Next slide, please. We have a biodiversity crisis, where at current trends we're on track to lose 40% of all species by the end of the century. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, the climate crisis is already having a major impact on food systems. And so basically, how do we redirect financial flows, and what kind of opportunities do we need to look at in order to turn those trends around? Next slide, please. Just a little bit of background. The global food system is responsible for about 33% of global greenhouse gas emissions. This is not only CO2, but also a lot of methane and nitrous oxides. Methane, especially from livestock, and nitrous oxides, especially from fertilizer use. And it's clear that even if we completely decarbonize the energy system tomorrow, which is a big challenge in and of itself, we will not be able to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees without a radical change in the way we farm, the way we eat, and how much food waste we have. Next slide, please. So I would like to sum up basically some of the guiding principles that I carry through most of my work in terms of decision making and suggestions for reform in investment flows. Next slide, please. Number one is to feed people, not animals. Meat is the highest emitting foodstuff. Especially, but not only ruminants, so cows, camels, goats, sheep. And feeding all of that livestock is a major driver of deforestation. Soy, one of the main things that we feed animals, 75% of global soy production goes to feed animals and not people. If we could be feeding people instead of animals, we could actually go a long ways to addressing some of that hunger crisis. And there have been studies that find that we can feed an extra 4 billion people a year by feeding people instead of animals. Next slide. Grow crops for people, not energy. Similarly, the calories that we put into creating biofuels would be enough to feed approximately 1.9 billion extra people. And especially first and second generation biofuels have a very limited climate benefit, if any at all. There are various studies that are looking at this, and not all of them agree, but there's a sort of an overview that if there is any climate benefit, if you look at the whole value chain, it's negligible. Shifting crop production from producing biofuels into feeding people would also avoid 10% of agricultural expansion into natural areas in the next 30 years. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about zoonotic diseases in a moment. And last but not least, mainstream agroecological principles. And we'll hear more about organic farming in a moment. But that reduces emissions all along the supply chain, not only in terms of producing the fertilizers, which it is very emissions intensive, the fertilizers, the herbicides, the pesticides, but also improving soil health and the soil carbon sink capacity, while also improving human health and preserving biodiversity. And there are a number of key mitigation measures, and we'll hear a lot about them in a moment. But it's really important to think about how do we approach this, and what kind of policy measures can we use to foster this transformation. One major one is increasing corporate value chain transparency to reduce deforestation. If we know where the deforestation is coming from in these global commodity markets, we can better target how to address that. Support climate-smart agriculture and agroecological principles, and I'll let my colleagues on the panel go into that in more detail. Similarly, the meat that we do produce needs to be done through sustainable practices, such as silvopastoral practices, which we'll also hear about more. Supporting innovative ventures in the development of alternative protein industries. As I mentioned earlier, ending financial support for first-generation biofuels, and industrial livestock farming, and incentivizing a phase down of synthetic fertilizers, which again, in terms of the carbon emissions to produce the fertilizers and the nitrous oxide emissions in the application of the fertilizers, will also take us a long ways toward the Paris goals. And all of that can be wrapped up into often subsidy reforms, but also looking at our investments in agribusiness around the world. Thank you.
Thanks so much for setting the scene for us for the rest of the discussion. So I'll hand over to. Oh, did you want to do Naira's thing, or are you ready for that, Karen? I'll just do. We've got a. Sorry, folks. We've just got a 5-minute video coming up from Naira, who couldn't be with us today, but we'll be here tomorrow morning. So we'll play that, and then I'll come immediately to Karen. Thank you.
Hello, everybody.
I don't know if that's possible, but. Thank you. Okay, here we go.
Naira Hofmeister, an investigative journalist from Repórter Brasil. And I should be in Sharm el-Sheikh with you today, but I have a flight cancelled, and because of this, I'm still in Dubai waiting to fly to Egypt and to meet all of you. Because of this, I decided to record this video to highlight some points in our investigation that I believe will help in your debate. And I will be very happy in answering all the questions you have, both by email or even personally when I arrive at Sharm el-Sheikh tomorrow. So, our investigation reveals very strong evidence that JBS is feeding chickens it slaughters in Brazil with animal feed produced with grains from farms suspected of having carried out recent deforestation in the Amazon and the Cerrado. As you know, this debate is really important because meat consumption in the world is growing very fast. According to Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, the meat consumption will increase in 14% by 2013 in comparison to the numbers of the nowadays. And to attend this demand in Brazil, the companies are moving their poultry production from the very south of the country to this region that we call Central West, where the grains production is concentrated. It is easier, as we heard from our sources, it is easier to transport the meat pieces than the huge volume of the grains that they need to feed these animals into farms they have connected in their system. So because of that, we decided to focus our investigation in a JBS unit in Tangará da Serra municipality that is in Mato Grosso, the main grain producers in Brazil. And it's a very recent operation of JBS. Is the first operation of JBS in poultry, in slaughtering poultry in Mato Grosso. So represents this movement of the industry from the south to the Central West. And JBS, as you know, is the biggest meat packer in the world, but is also the leader in poultry slaughtering worldwide. So because of this, we decided to focus on this company. And we found in public documents that both Bunge and Amagi, two of the main traders in the world and grain traders in Brazil, are suppliers from JBS Tangará da Serra unit. And this is for soy, so Bunge and Amagi supply soy for JBS, and JBS also buys directly from farmers corn grains that were also used to produce animal feed. So we have found 5 different cases in this investigation that reveal some contradictions or some evidence that this production of animal feed to feed animals, to feed chicken that will be slaughtered, is passing through deforested farms in Brazil, both legal or illegal. But in the case that this deforestation is legal, that there is an issue regarding the industry agreements on deforestation. So I will explain one by one case. The first case is a soy farm that is completely inside the Amazon biome, which is protected by Brazilian law, and is also the target of the soy moratorium. This agreement that I'm sure you all know, it is signed by trading companies as Bunge and Amagi, and it's supposed to ban from the supply chain recently deforested farms, even if the deforestation is legal. So the companies are committed to don't buy any soy from deforested areas, even if the deforestation is legal. But that what we found is a farm that is divided into 2 different areas. One of them is a traditional area, legalized for supply soy for the companies according to the soy moratorium. And the second area was a preserved one until 2017, when it started to be deforested. From 2017 to 2018, this a part of this area was deforested, and from 2019 onwards, soy was planted in this deforested area, according to satellite images that we asked for specialists to analyze for us. So this producer is a frequently supplier for Bunge and Amagi, and consequently, probably it grains goes to JBS unit in Tangará da Serra. The documents that we consult shows all the operations, all the business that this farmer did with Amagi and Bunge was made. Was registered with the origin in the legalized farm, the old one. But the fact is that this recently open area, that is a different farm, didn't have the legal registration to sell the grains. So if this farmer wants to sell the grains produced in this recently open area, he needs to put their documents to document this selling with another origin. So this is a very traditional case that illustrates, or that could illustrate, what we call soybeans laundering. That is when the producer mix two different origins, one legal and one illegal, or not illegal, but not comply with soy moratorium agreement, and sell everything together to the companies. We consult all the companies, JBS, Amagi, and Bunge, and they told us about their commitments with the preservation of the Amazon, and they explain us all the system that they have to analyze and to authorize their business. But in fact, they couldn't explain how they do to prevent this soybean laundering. So this is an important debate that it needs to be done. Well, let's go to the second case. The second case is a farm inside the Cerrado biome. That is the most biodiverse savanna in the world. It's a very specific biome, ecoregion, Brazil. So this biome, Cerrado, is not protected by soy moratorium. So despite any commitment made by the companies, the true fact is that the companies can buy, and usually buy, grains produced in the Cerrado area in farms that were deforested recently with authorization. They can't buy if it's illegal deforestation because it's forbidden, as Brazilian law requires. But yes, they can buy these grains in farms that were recently deforested with authorization. And this second case, we found a farm that was authorized to deforest a huge area in the Cerrado. It's an area more or less 600 soccer field, so it's really big. And this farm exceeded the authorized limit of deforestation and received an embargo in 2020. We found public registers of business between this farm and the companies in 2019, so before the embargo area, but the deforestation was made in 2018. So this is interesting to debate, because if this farm was located in the Amazon biome, this business will be impossible because of the soil moratorium. But this farm is in Cerrado area and is located only 10 kilometers from the border of the Amazon. And because of this business are okay for all the companies. But there is the second point that the farm exceeded the legal authorization to deforest, and because of this, he received an embargo. But as this embargo only came 2 years later than the deforestation occurred, companies didn't saw any problem to buying, despite the companies have their own monitoring systems that, for example, use satellite images as the satellite images we use it to found this case, and they probably could find this situation. They could find this area that exceeded the authorization. So, but as the fine and the embargo was not registered yet, they follow doing business with this farmer.
Okay, so Naira will also be speaking tomorrow if you want to hear more about that, about the case. But absolutely, I think we've got a really good sense from our first two speakers, from Aki and from Naira, about the real challenges that we're facing and just how broken our food systems are. I mean, Naira was talking about illegally deforested areas in Brazil, and that the crops, soy, etc., that are grown on those lands actually being sold to large agribusiness who somehow don't even quite seem to understand that's where it's coming from. So it's actually quite shocking. So I think that thank you to Aki and Naira for kind of outlining, just some of the real challenges that we're facing in the food system. So I'd like to move us on now to the kind of the second segment, if you like, which we've titled Good Food for Thought. And basically it's a conversation on some solutions and some experiences. So how might we transform our agricultural systems to feed the world? So I'd like to now pass over to Karen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. Long day for many of you, I'm sure. So hopefully we'll be able to all get through this and eat some dinner at the end, some nice healthy dinner. So you'll notice that this is called Scaling Up Agroecology and Organic Agriculture. There's quite a bit of debate out there and many different terms, but we like to think that organic grew from the science of agroecology. There are far more commonalities than there are differences, and I think that's very important. At this point, and to meet the challenges we have, we need to be working together. Next slide, please. So you can see here on the screen some of the problems that we've already talked about and some of the solutions that are provided by organic and agroecological production systems. Organic is based on principles. We have 4 principles: health, ecology, fairness and care. And you can see there how the solutions equate to those principles. It moves far beyond a checklist of what you do and don't do. It comes back to really thinking about how we grow our food and how that works with our environment. Next slide, please. I thought I'd share just a couple of examples because these systems can look very different in very different places. And this is MI Island in Vanuatu in the South Pacific, who came to us a few years ago because they were having challenges managing their coastal fisheries. It was overfished, and they had discovered that land-based activities were causing significant damage to their reef. So they decided their whole island to go organic in order to protect their reefs. So we worked with them, introducing land management, cover crops, different systems to avoid erosion, increased their biodiversity, and as a result they have a wonderfully organic island, a more diverse food system, and their reefs are now protected and are regenerating at a really rapid rate. The community receives most of their income through tourism, so maintaining that reef is really critical. And of course, maintaining the health of the island through those production systems is also really critical. Next slide, please. Off to India, Timbuktu in Andhra Pradesh. This is one of the driest parts of India. This organisation is a small NGO that started working with 58 villages in Andhra Pradesh and using organic practices, introducing traditional livestock and traditional seeds, millet. They've been able to completely revive that landscape from what you see in 1991 to that photograph in 2013. It hasn't only transformed the landscape and all those trees, creating a microclimate where they've been able to grow more crops. They're also able to pay, because of the organic certification, between a 20 and 50% premium to their farmers for what is produced on those lands. Next slide, please. We often hear, well, it's all very well for smallholders in mixed systems, but I'm a big commercial grower, how is it going to work for me? So, and this is a great example of that. The Balbo Group in Brazil, which is now known as Native, are organic sugar producers. Well, now they're organic. They weren't organic. And they realised that they were losing money and they needed to do something about it. So they switched to organic practices and they modified their harvesting machinery, going from what is very common in sugar of burning the cane first, which is very damaging to the soil, to using a machine that would harvest green. They also produce 100% of their energy from 6 million tonnes of sugarcane in a year to power their own power plants for the sugar mill, which is also quite phenomenal. Since they have converted to organic, their land's productivity has increased by 20%, and the farms have a higher biodiversity than the conventional farms in their neighbourhood, again by 20%. Their soil had 1% of organic matter before they converted, now they have 3. The nearby rainforest only has 4. So you can see the power of these types of production systems in changing landscapes, soil, and also livelihoods. So IFOAM Organics International, next slide please, has been promoting and working with different groups that promote these methodologies for quite a long time. We're 50 years old this year. And we teamed up with the World Futures Council, who do a policy award each year, the Future Policy Award. In 2018, it was around scaling up agroecology. And you can see some of the winners on the screen there, and I encourage you all to Google them and have a look. There's some great stories there about transition. Sikkim in India has converted the whole state to organics. There are others that take different models and different forms, but it's well worth having a look at those. Next slide, please. So organic agriculture and agroecology are knowledge-intensive systems as opposed to input-intensive systems. For that to be successful and for us to scale that, there's a lot of work involved. It involves the capacity building of farmers, better extension services and advisory services, affordable and available appropriate inputs are necessary, and we need continued research to continue to improve these systems and deal with the challenges we'll find under a changing climate. So IFOAM has a policy toolkit that's available online that helps build the policies that can support all those things that we need to transition and scale agroecology and organic. The idea of the toolkit is it's available for anybody who wants to be able to support the development of these policies. And we have examples in the Pacific of community groups, NGOs, using the policy toolkit. We actually have a specific one for the Pacific, but it's very similar. And that community group has worked across the country in Fiji to build a policy that the government is now going to adopt. So it wasn't government-led, it was led by farmers' organisations, utilising a toolkit like this. Next slide. We've also working to support policymakers. They're important in this. So we have the Food Policy Forum for Change, which is helping to build a community of practice around policy development for the transformative thinking that we need to change our systems to sustainability going forward, and focusing on, of course, ecology, agroecology, organics and sustainability. So this involves peer-to-peer exchanges, there's resources available online, and it's contributing to changes such as new national initiatives being developed, and it's also feeding into international dialogues to help improve the discussion around how we build sustainable food systems. Next slide, please. And of course, we're in COP, UNFCCC, and there's areas here where organic policies should be working, and we need to be coherent with these things. And one is the national adaptation plans, trying to help countries identify their needs and to develop and implement the programs they need. And agriculture is central in many NAPs. We also have the numbers. We love acronyms in the UN world. It's fabulous. And that was from COP18 in Doha, and is really central in addressing greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, the nationally determined contributions out of the Paris Agreement. And agriculture is prominent in a lot of NDCs, not all, but we need more ambition in this area to include agroecology in our response to help people manage their emissions. And next and final slide, just a thank you from one of my favourite farmers in Niue. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And yeah, some great examples there, from small scale to larger scale as well. And certainly looking at that, I love the ridge to reef, and also how preservation of the coral reef is actually going to be a bit of a tourist draw card. I mean, I'm from that area of the world myself, nearby in Australia, and it's very important. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I'd now like to pass over to Dada. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I hope that you are not hungry, even though frozen or freezing. Yeah, but thank you so much for your attention. I'll try to make this brief. I'm here to talk about solutions, so I'm very happy that I will be sharing examples from my region, from Southeast Asia, on silvopastoral systems. I would like to say that I am not a livestock expert or a silvopastoral expert. I'm an advisor and coordinator for the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, which is a knowledge exchange platform in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, promoting climate-smart, friendly, and climate-friendly approaches to agriculture and agri-food system. So silvopastoral systems, thanks Aki for mentioning silvopastoral systems as a form of a solution. And we're all familiar with it. We've seen biblical stories where there are pastoralists and where cattle and livestock graze undergrowth or at the edges or understories of forests. It provides shelter to animals and more nutritious fodder. It is also generating more income to farmers. There are multiple environmental benefits to this approach, as some of you are probably aware. It restores degraded pasture lands and forests, and you could see that also trees, shrubs, legumes, and grasses can improve the soil and increase carbon storage and water quality altogether. It also helps in the preservation of biodiversity, and landscapes are made more resilient. We could see this practice all over the world. And as I said, as a child, I've seen this in biblical Christian stories, but it's also still remaining, although governments do not often recognize silvopastoral systems to large scale. From small scale to large scale, we have examples in Latin America. We have examples in Southeast Asia of this being applied. For example, in northern Laos and northern Thailand, where communities grow rice next to cash crops like cassava, and while their livestock are grazing in the nearby forest. In Indonesia, you've seen it being practiced in small-scale agroforestry projects where the livestock is raised at the nearby forest. In the Philippines, you could see silvopastoral systems being practiced at the backyard where grasses are growing and adjacent to forest. My only recommendations for policymakers when asked on why this is not being scaled up and why it's not being recognized by governments is to recognize the environmental and economic benefits of this system for farmers, wherein they are able to diversify their income. It also restores and protects ecosystems, reduce emissions, and build resilience. To scale this up, I think that government needs to support farmers' knowledge and also provide a lot of financial incentives for this system. Because as we know, the benefit of leaving the forest alone is not readily felt by the farmers at the net present value. It does not have net present value at the moment. So there has to be some financial and economic incentives for preserving the forest and letting their livestock graze there. Silvopastoral systems also should be part of national climate action plans and strategies, the way our other speaker mentioned, to be mentioned in NDCs, NAPs, and NAMAs. And in that way, it will be more supported and will have a clear role to play in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture extensions should also keep promoting silvopastoral systems. And really, financing institutions should really encourage this approach and offer financial support to those who are marginalized by this system, such as women, local communities, and indigenous communities. There should also be looking at insurance schemes on how this could be further supported. And what is the role also of silvopastoral systems in the greater picture of REDD+ and payments for ecosystem services, because it really does play a role in maintenance of environmental services. And for ASEAN policymakers or policymakers in general, to support knowledge sharing of this very informal and small scale, often small scale system approach to agriculture. That's all from my side.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, some really good food for thought there, particularly around, I really like that kind of final comment that you were talking about around payment for ecosystems and services under REDD and the role of the silvopastoralists there. So, as well as, of course, the benefits of including in the NAPAs and the NAMAs and the NDCs. So, thank you. Thank you for that. And I know it's very cold in here. We have asked for the air conditioning to be turned off, but apparently it's not, people are not sure how to do that. So please just try and rug up. We asked for it to be turned off both for the coolness of it and the environment, but also for the sound. But we have not yet been successful in that. So please bear with us. Yes, I hand over to James now. Thanks, James.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you for coming to this late event and sticking through the cold. I'm quite enjoying it, but I'm quite well wrapped up. If anyone wants my jacket, I guess I can offer that. So wanted, after some excellent talks, and thank you to the other speakers, to really just finish on an overview of why, particularly thinking about the animals themselves, are important within these contexts of agroecology and silvopastoral systems and climate change. And we'll base my talk of overview partly on this lovely position statement that World Animal Protection and Eurogroup for Animals supported along with other members of the Federation, including Aquatic Life Institute and Compassion in World Farming, who I can see in the audience. So next slide, please. Angel, thank you. So animal welfare, just as a quick overview of what it is, it's how animals cope. And that's going to be very important in that we're talking here about efficiency, but we're also talking about resilience. And it's also, as well as the physical health of the animals and their mental state, about their naturalness and their harmony and our relationships with them. Next slide, please, Angel. So the first point that I think and hope is coming through pretty clear from a number of talks and presentations and positions here is that despite some of the rhetoric presented by the industry, actually reducing the intensive animal farming, often for a surplus of animal products that are not needed, brings those efficiency gains. And that's true both from thinking about the input to output resources, but also thinking about the waste aspect of efficiency, and actually in market efficiency in terms of knowledge and information and externalities. And I'll talk about these three examples of wastage, climate change, greenhouse gases, and therefore mitigation as a solution, and disease prevention. Next slide, please. So we've hopefully heard these figures, and they vary from 14.5% up to 18 or even higher in terms of the percentage of the planet's greenhouse gases that are produced from agriculture, and specifically from animal agriculture. And while they sound like scary, problematic figures, it absolutely presents us with a very clear way of changing our greenhouse gas emissions in a very achievable way as individuals, as organisations, and as countries and internationally. And similarly, I think the fact that 40%, this enormous amount of global arable land used not to feed humans but to feed animals, as Aki was saying, that's again a massive opportunity of land that can be liberated either for better farming methods or returned to nature. And all of that, to make the point very strongly on the efficiency, is that's for about 18% of the world's calories on effectively, in most cases, and certainly in the global north, for unnecessary calories, perhaps even excess. Next slide, please. So again, we've heard this, I hope, so it's a real take-home message, is the higher share of plant-based foods is and of itself a mitigation benefits. If we have these massively high differences in greenhouse gas emissions, absolutely that's a way then to change our own footprints. And similarly, if 20% of the commercial fishing is given to aquaculture and animal food products, well again, by avoiding those trophic levels of feeding plants to animals or feeding animals to animals, we gain those efficiencies in calories and other nutrients, again freeing up to avoid some degree of the overfishing as well as the greenhouse gas impacts. Next slide, please. And therefore, protecting animals in our use of them is an efficient way, but more as a solution out there. 30% of global emissions are absorbed by marine life, in which the marine animals play an absolutely integral part. So allowing that restocking, allowing those natural flourishing animals means we are capturing the carbon both in their own bodies, including when they die rather than being removed going down to the ocean floor, but also that animals are part of those ecosystems. There's a nice study in the Congo Basin where elephants, where they've been removed versus where they've been left over years in areas. Where the elephants have been left, there's 7% more above ground biomass, because the elephants are an integral part of maintaining that ecosystem and its carbon sequestration above land, and similar arguments for in the soil. Next slide, please, Angel. So much for efficiency. Let's think a bit more about resilience, because we know we are going to see climate change and some of its direct and indirect effects. So I wanted to talk a bit here about why that respect for the animal's well-being is a way to confer greater resilience, and then for ourselves that adaptation, both by having healthier animals and therefore less disease spread, but also by, again, allowing animals in their ecosystems to strengthen those ecosystems and their resilience and their services to us. Next slide, please. So animal welfare, if we think of it as animals' ability to cope, it's animals' ability to cope in particular with stressors and challenges, both from the ones that climate change are going to place on our agricultural and food systems and for wild animals in their ecosystems. So by having more healthy, higher well-being, more adaptive animals at an individual level, at a species level, at a genetic level, allows them to adapt to the challenges that are going to come. And we know some of those. So absolutely heat stress already having an impact on both wild animals and livestock, and that's quite apart from the increased prevalence in extreme events. And similarly, if we reduce the stress, we're improving the animal's abilities to cope in a natural way with diseases, particularly communicable diseases that may well increase in prevalence through our farming systems, but also through climate change. The same would be true for parasites. Next slide, please, Angel. And of course, because we're still in the aftershocks of it, it's worth highlighting we are waiting for the next pandemics as we respond. But also for farmers and for food systems, that endemic and epidemic diseases are equally important. So if we're thinking on the one end of pandemics, a very modest spend compared to the response that we had to spend, and of course that was insufficient, especially in many countries, and certainly unbalanced, that would protect us from a number of the risk factors for ongoing pandemics, such as wild meat trade, deforestation, and the spillover via livestock as amplification hosts. Next slide, please. And very quickly, at the other end of some of the diseases that we're seeing endemic in our animal systems and in our own society. So Campylobacter, we know, is a widespread global health concern, actually across the global north and the global south. About 1.3 million cases, I think, in the US each year. And we are seeing the development of multi-drug resistance Campylobacter, particularly Campylobacter jejuni and cechi, particularly again in poultry, which is one of probably the main source of human foodborne Campylobacter alongside water. So we're seeing that development. Next slide, please, Angel. And we're also seeing increasing evidence which fits with the sort of logical biological mechanisms that actually improving animals' welfare allows them to have the ability to cope with those low-grade or higher-grade infections, and therefore reducing the isolates and contamination, particularly then on the food that is eaten, but probably also for shedding within the environment. Thank you, Angel. Next slide, please. And then the penultimate slide is to reflect a similar idea for animals in ecosystems. So again, having animals as part of ecosystems where they can adapt behaviorally, they have the diversity to be able to adapt genetically to the changes that we're going to see and that we cannot entirely predict, and therefore need emergent adaptation from ecosystems and the animals embedded in them, which again protects us from extreme weathers as well as the animals. Next slide, please. So as the the call for this from a policy perspective that we've heard, but I think it boils down to three elements in this context. One is that transition to higher welfare systems that also are more just and more sustainable, protecting wildlife and their natural habitats, and that's as true for the animals, which is why we see them in the imagery as from purely anthropocentric environmentalism, and those shifts towards plant-rich diets that confer those benefits relatively easily if we can get there on the policy. Thank you very much. I think the last slide is to say thank you, and I've put the link if anybody wants any more information, and look forward to the panel.
Thanks so much, James, and thanks very much for outlining how animal welfare can contribute to a resilient and efficient food system, as well as, of course, talking about the benefits, the climate mitigation benefits that animal welfare has to climate, as well as, of course, to the animals themselves. So I'd like to open the floor. I think we have one comment from the floor, and then I'd like to open for questions. Please don't go. We do have food. I am told it is coming. It is supposed to be vegan food. So please, yeah, I think Dado had to go. She's quite busy with the negotiations. But please don't go, and please have a think if you have any questions. One of my colleagues likes to say this is the time when everybody looks at their shoes, so don't look at your shoes. And you know, I also have some questions up my sleeve to for our panel as well. So I want to ask, do we have any comments from the floor? Did you want to? Yeah. Oh, yeah, technical staff. Do we have a microphone, please? So I know that Lutz Rebe, who's a member of the European Economic and Social Committee and Director of the Department for Nature Conservation Policy at Euronature, was keen to make a brief comment. He's waiting for a microphone, and then we will come to your questions. So please have your questions ready. Thank you very much for the microphone.
Is it working? Yeah. Yeah, Lutz Ribbe, I'm German. I represent the German environmental organizations within the European Economic and Social Committee. And we are an advisory body to the Commission, to the European Commission, and to the decision-making bodies such as the European Parliament and the Council. I have a question to the three speakers, but I have also a special question to you, Aki. First of all, I'd like to say I completely agree what you said. I think it's absolutely clear. You describe the problem and you describe the solutions. And you've done it in the agriculture sector, and running around here, around the COP, we see the same situation in the energy sector. The description of the problem and the description of the solution. My question to all of you three is how you deal with the politicians, how do they react, or why don't they react? And a special question to you, Aki. I missed something. I think we have to speak much more about using grassland. 2/3 of the worldwide agriculture usable land is grassland, and we all cannot eat grass. We find other stuff there. But the cow can eat grass. And I have seen nothing in your presentation about using grassland, which is important also for biodiversity. Maybe you can give a short comment on that. And by the way, the European Economic and Social Committee recently adopted a position on protein. we should say and we should understand that the figures are a little bit different between Europe and worldwide. The last figure I have seen on the amount of plants on harvest which is used for feeding animals, I think you have spoken about 40%. In the EU it's much more. It is 60%. And around 25 to 30% is used for biofuels. So from the harvest in Europe, we use just 15%, around 15% for a direct use of our diet. 15%. So we waste soil, and soil is limited, and that's why we have to import so much soya. But again, grassland is very much needed, and there is no strategy at all within the European Union to make use of grassland. And there's a simple reason for that. Grassland is directly used by the farmers, but this, what you describe, is big business.
Great, thank you very much. Could I ask one of my team, please, to take the microphone so that they can pass it to people on the floor if they also want to ask questions. But I'll ask the panel to give a brief response. I've also got some questions from people online, which is highly exciting because it means we actually have people listening online. So thank you to those people who are listening, and I will get to some of your questions, but I'll go to this question first. Can I ask the panelists to give a brief response to the question that was asked about essentially how do you deal with the politicians on this issue? How do they react? And if they don't react, why do you think they don't react? And then if anyone wants to venture an observation or a comment on the issue of grasslands that was raised. So I'll just go along in order if that's all right. I'll come to Aki because you've been the person who hasn't spoken for a bit. And then I'll just ask Karen and James to jump in. But if you could keep your comments relatively brief so that we can have some interaction with the online people and from the floor. So thank you.
How do we deal with the politicians? I think it's the $1,000,000 question. I think we can see in sort of the reform efforts for the European Common Agricultural Policy that it's a major barrier, and when we do want to change things, they come out in droves, and especially the sort of the conventional farmers come out in droves and block streets and go to the barricades. I think one strategy is really, and I think this is something that we're making a little bit more progress on, is really encouraging labels and highlighting the benefits in terms of the added value in terms of what we can sell the food for when it comes from sustainable practices. I think in the next in preparation for the next crisis, I think there's a lot of short-term measures that have been launched in the wake of the global commodity crisis coming from the interruption of grain exports from Russia and Ukraine. I think it's important that we stay engaged in terms of finding ways to fight hunger, and hunger gets the attention of politicians, I think, in a way that sometimes larger agricultural policy reforms don't necessarily, and then they think they can't go there. But if we're focused on really feeding people and the necessity to feed people, those are two major arguments that we can use with politicians. In terms of grassland, yeah, I'm not an expert on that. One major problem is that we have a major competition for land between preserving land for nature, preserving land for sustainable food production, and potentially in the future more and more not only for nature but also the levels of negative emissions projected in IPCC scenarios, often coming from biomass, there's a major danger in the future that there will be increased competition for land coming from bioenergy and CCS, and it's not a feasible technology right now, it's not mature, but there is a danger that is going to come in and pose a challenge for food systems and preserving nature. And obviously grasslands are also a major carbon sink, so that's also very important.
Yeah, politicians, that's an interesting question. I think politicians, probably like most of us, they like a solution, but they don't want it to be too difficult, and they want it to be low risk. And so I think part of what we need to be able to do is present our solutions with the full package of how we get there. It can't be too aspirational and too high risk because you'll get a hard no. But you've got to be able to talk through the pathway. And I think examples are powerful with politicians and demonstrating to them how they can benefit their people through these things. I think that's really important as well. The policy forum that IFOAM runs where politicians can learn from each other or bureaucrats can learn from each other, I think is also a powerful tool. Farmers learn best looking over the neighbour's fence, and I think that politicians are the same. They'll watch and learn from what other politicians are doing and saying. In COP, yeah, that's even harder. And at the moment, frankly, the only thing on anyone's agenda at COP is finance. So unless you can frame it in finance, it's going to be very hard to get anyone's ear at the moment. That said, I think we've demonstrated in the past the power of the pavilions and the thinking that happens in the pavilions. It takes a couple of cycles, but the thinking that happens out there eventually leaches into the negotiation rooms. Net zero started in the pavilions with the NGO sector, and now it's a thing in UNFCCC. So I don't think we can give up. We keep working through those various mechanisms.
Thank you, and agreeing with those who won't repeat, I think there's also an argument about de-risking. So we know there are food security and availability crises coming, and affordability. They're here and they will keep coming, same as pandemics. And while they might still not be short-term enough for some politicians, there's no longer an excuse that they're unexpected and we can't be ready for them. And I think the other point is about there are positive arguments, so investment in some of the growth, e.g. some of the alternatives. And I think because it's different in different countries, protecting and enhancing some of the traditional methods of farming, again, means you can stop the sort of Western Northern exportation, and means actually we're ready for when eventually food security means we have to move away from intensive farming. So actually there are solutions there. On grasslands, there are grasslands and grasslands. So again, while similarly don't homogenize on the different benefits that you get from different systems.
That's great. Thank you. I want to come. I'll come to some online questions in a moment, but the audience has been very patient. I want to ask if anybody an angel over here has got the microphone. Yeah, we have a question up the back there. We'll bring the microphone to you.
Thank you for the sharing. It has been very interesting. I'm from Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation. My name is Mei Ling. We also promote plant-based diet. And you just answered my question, first question, that regarding how can we influence the policy maker. But I live in Germany, and I know it has been not so easy that to promote plant-based diet. A few years ago, German government tried to promote it, but it's matter about the personal choice and behavior change. But from your experience, how can we influence more stakeholders to work together to able to promote, because it's a sustainable lifestyle, and especially if like I know that Germany export lots of meat to China now, yeah. And it's also kind of, it's not so good for healthy. I don't know if in future we can eat more regarding the plant-based diet going to bring more healthy benefit to our body, then maybe it can become a trend, not only that people think to eat meat is a wealthy symbol, but also to be healthy is a wealthy symbol. It's going to save lots of financial costs from the medical side too. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Did anyone want to offer any response to that? Thanks for your input. Yeah, go ahead, James.
So absolutely, I think we bring it, all the arguments are coming together, I think, on meat eating. And again, here, one of the things I have enjoyed is going to other talks in other fields and hearing, at this point, just sort of aligned or consistent messaging. So I think just as we're calling on politicians to work and agencies to work together in a de-siloed system, holistic way, I think the same is true for us as civil society trying to influence consumer behaviour to make sure we're combining all those arguments and working together. And I think actually, the fact that we have seen some very strong shifts in diet change over years in many countries, again means it can be successful. It has a change curve, and that change curve is years, just as smoking was. But we keep pushing, and I think it, again, of course, to make the obvious point, it's different in different countries. So in some countries where we are talking about unhealthy excess that's causing health problems from overeating and the climate overheating, I think we'll always have a point where there's a bit of conspicuous consumption around meat, and that we need to try and avoid, and at some point that will become an ethical point. And then there are other cultural uses of meat, which again I think are separate, and they're not what we're talking about, the large-scale intensive farming for overconsumption of meat. And we need to be very careful about distinguishing those, and that doesn't justify that.
If I can just add on to that, I was about to say something about cultural value. Living in the Pacific, exchange of pigs is a really important part of the culture. But what isn't part of the culture is eating huge amounts of imported chicken. And one of the reasons that happens is because it is so cheap. People don't have a lot of money in their pockets, and when they have to make a food choice and the imported chicken from the US is, an eighth of the price of the locally caught fish, they buy the chicken. So we've really got to look at some of those fundamental things in the food system that allow that highly subsidized product with so many externalities that are not considered in the price to land on people's plate and cause the damage that it does.
Yeah, I think also there I would just reiterate this price issue. I think subsidy reform needs to play a really major role in terms of that, and then we need to start paying farmers to farm sustainably and in terms of the ecosystem services, and not to produce large amounts. That's a major issue, and I think on the other hand we do see some hope, and I think I'm relatively lactose intolerant, and I have to say a number of years ago I didn't have much of an alternative to having black coffee, but the explosion in plant-based milk. In terms of soy milk, potato milk, oat milk, etc., etc. It's a real success story in terms of venture capital, innovative startups that is now going really, really mainstream in Europe, North America, and Asia. I think that is something we are going to see in terms of plant-based proteins as well, and we have traditions of tofu and fermented soybeans and other things in different cultures. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in terms of venture capital going into many other kinds of plant-based proteins going forward, and we need to carry that message into the world in terms of promoting Michelin-starred plant-based chefs, promoting the recipes, promoting that in canteens, and educating children and then the broader population at large about how to cook creatively and deliciously with plant-based foods.
Great, thank you. I'm just I'm looking at my phone, not because I'm answering my emails or my messages, but because we've got some online questions. But I'm also very aware that we're almost at time. So we're not going to get to all of these questions. I don't know if there's any way we can respond to people after. There was certainly, I won't ask for a response to this, but I'll just read this one out, and then there's another one I do want to ask for a response to. So there's a really interesting one around how we balance reducing animal source food consumption with achieving nutrient adequacy for all. And, you know, I think we know that animal protein is only a very small percentage of the protein equation. The one I wanted to come to, actually, there's two, and they're a bit wrapped up with the sort of the previous question, but I'll read one of them, and I'll just ask for very, very brief responses. Many NDCs, nationally determined contributions, mention livestock, but A, focus on adaptation, not mitigation, and B, fail to include costed plans for change. Goes to a bit to the issue Karen raised about finance. How can we better support member states on this? And then, you know, the other one, which I think is around, it builds on the question that was asked before about how we get this into the political arena, and, you know, I think we got a bit of an answer to, was what does this mean for the UNFCCC negotiations, and what can we hope or ask for? So I'm just going to get a lightning response, like literally 30 seconds from each person on the panel. And then, yeah, I've got one more thing to do, and yeah, thank you. Let's mix it up. Let's start with Karen, James, and then Aki.
Okay, that's a really difficult question, and I've been working on the Coronivia discussions this week, where mitigation is not included, and probably won't be by the end of this time either. So it is a challenge to have that conversation. The NDCs are a national decision, so it really is around the activists and the people in the food system at national level working on their governments to get the priorities right there. And then it's about finding the financing to help support the transition over.
Yeah, agreeing. I think it comes from the national level on the NDCs, but of course also for the negotiations. That's where people are bringing their positions back from the capital. So I think it does come down to our general advocacy and representing how around the world people are caring about these issues. There are some big influencers in the ag sector, but actually people want to look after their animals well, they want to eat healthily, they want to save the planet, and that just needs to be remembered and reiterated.
Great. Angel, did you want to put up the very last? Yeah. We've got it is exceptionally short, I promise you, closing video, and then I will wrap us up because we're on time. We did start a little bit late, but it's also very late. So I will wrap us up. Is that... I'm sure it's on its way. Here we go.
World Animal Protection is calling on countries to publicly recognize that factory farming through an extensive deforestation driven by animal feed production is a major contributor to climate change. Additionally, we are asking for regulations to be tightened to prevent deforestation in animal feed production and imported products, including animal feed, meat, and dairy.
World Animal Protection is calling for high per capita meat consumption countries to adopt the goal to halve global animal protein production and consumption by 2040 and support a just protein transition to reverse the destructive impact of land use changes and deforestation caused by global factory farming and feed production.
World Animal Protection is calling for countries to stop further expansion of factory farming by committing to a 10-year moratorium on new factory farms to enable food justice, food security, greenhouse gas reduction, and biodiversity protection.
So I think all that's left for me to do is to thank the panel. I'll just mention them and then if we can give them a big round of applause. So I'd like to thank Aki, Kachi, Naira, Hofmeister in her absence, Karen Mapusua, Daru Bacudo, and James Yeates. Can we give everyone a round of applause? Thank you. And can we give the audience a round of applause for hanging in there till 8 p.m. on week 2 of the COP? So thank you, everyone. And I know we've been promising you all night and all week catering, but it's not coming. There's been a mistake, which is extremely frustrating because I am extremely hungry, as I'm sure all of you are. And it was to be some lovely vegan food, although we have had a bit of fish with the vegan food this week. So, anyway, I apologise deeply for that. If you see me around, you can hit me up for some of my cashew nuts or, something that I've pilfered from the hotel buffet in the morning and I'll share it with you. But thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Good night, everybody.